Just when it seemed like Oak Island had given up every secret it had, new insider leaks suggest Season 13 may change everything. According to sources close to production, a hidden underground chamber, intact, man-made, and buried far deeper than expected, has quietly shifted the entire direction of the search. This isn't another collapsed shaft or random artifact. It's a structure that shouldn't exist, built with precision and purpose, and possibly designed to stay hidden for centuries. If these details are accurate, the Oak Island mystery has never been about the money pit at all. Subscribe now, because what comes next could rewrite the entire story. For more than 2 centuries, nearly every Oak Island theory has revolved around the same idea: the money pit. Collapsed shafts, booby traps, flood tunnels, and endless layers of debris became the accepted language of the mystery. Entire fortunes were lost chasing that single point on the island. But according to new insider leaks, Season 13 may quietly dismantle that narrative altogether. Sources close to production claim the recent breakthrough did not come from a dramatic dig or a lucky shovel strike. It came from data, specifically a high-resolution subsurface image that reportedly showed something unmistakable: clean edges, right angles, and symmetry where none should exist. This wasn't a vague sonar blob or a questionable anomaly. It was a clearly defined rectangular chamber, buried more than 140 feet underground. That depth alone raises serious questions. At those levels, groundwater pressure, soil instability, and centuries of erosion should have destroyed any primitive structure long ago. Yet the image reportedly shows straight walls and a stable ceiling, suggesting intentional engineering rather than natural formation. According to the leak, the chamber measures roughly 10 feet wide by 15 feet long. Large enough to enter, large enough to store something significant, and large enough to require serious planning to build. What makes this even more unsettling is where it's located. Insiders say the chamber is not directly beneath the traditional money pit. Instead, it sits offset from it, positioned in a way that may align with known geometric markers on the island. If true, this immediately reframes centuries of failed searches. The chaos of the money pit may not have been a failure of excavation, but a success of misdirection. Crew members reportedly reacted with disbelief when the image first surfaced, not because it hinted at treasure, but because it suggested something far more dangerous to the story everyone thought they understood. A preserved chamber means control, planning, intent. It implies that whoever built Oak Island's underground works didn't just hide something. They designed a system meant to deceive anyone who came later. If this leak is accurate, then Oak Island's mystery didn't survive because it was too complex to solve. It survived because everyone was looking in exactly the wrong place. Once the idea of a preserved underground chamber surfaced, engineers and historians immediately focused on a single question: how is it still standing? At more than 140 feet below the surface, Oak Island is not stable ground. It's saturated with seawater, riddled with collapse zones, and infamous for pressure-driven flooding. Every major excavation in the area has proven that point again and again. At that depth, soil behaves less like earth and more like liquid. Wooden supports rot, stone fractures. Even modern shafts struggle without constant reinforcement. Yet according to the leaked data, this chamber hasn't collapsed, flooded, or deformed. Its walls appear straight, its ceiling intact. That alone separates it from every known structure tied to the money pit. What makes this more unsettling is the pressure involved. Estimates suggest over 60 pounds per square inch, pushing inward from all sides. That kind of force would crush untreated materials in a matter of years, not centuries. And yet this space appears to have resisted it completely. This has led to a controversial conclusion among those reviewing the data. The chamber wasn't built like the rest of Oak Island's underground works. It wasn't propped up with wood or stone. It was engineered to survive. Insiders claim scans indicate a lining along the interior walls, something dense, uniform, and resistant to corrosion. Not a patchwork solution, but a continuous protective layer. That detail changes everything. A reinforced chamber implies foreknowledge. The builders understood groundwater behavior, long-term pressure, and material decay. They didn't just dig and hope for the best. They planned for centuries. centuries. It also explains something that has puzzled researchers for decades. While the money pit repeatedly collapsed and refilled with debris, nearby areas showed strange stability anomalies that never made sense on their own. If a protected structure existed just beyond the main dig zone, it would explain why destruction seemed concentrated in one place and absent in another. If this chamber truly exists in the condition described, then Oak Island isn't a failed engineering project littered with mistakes. It's a controlled environment, one designed to punish the wrong approach while quietly preserving the real objective somewhere else. And that realization forces a difficult truth. Whoever built this didn't just hide something underground. They understood how people would search for it and how to make sure they never reached it. Once the existence of a preserved chamber was taken seriously, attention shifted to the most dangerous question of all: what's inside it? According to insider leaks, this wasn't speculation based on surface clues or hopeful guesswork. It came from density readings embedded in the subsurface scans themselves. The chamber, reportedly measuring roughly 10 by 15 feet, does not appear empty. The data suggests multiple dense objects resting on the chamber floor. Not debris, not collapsed material, distinct shapes with sharp edges and uniform mass. Sources claim at least 3 large rectangular forms were identified, each separated from the others, each producing density signatures far heavier than the surrounding structure. These readings immediately triggered comparisons to sealed containers. Their dimensions, roughly 4 feet long and 2 feet wide, match the classic proportions of chests or reinforced boxes used historically to transport valuables or sensitive items. But what unsettled analysts wasn't just their shape. It was their weight. The density levels reportedly exceed what would be expected from wood, stone, or basic metal casing. If accurate, this suggests the contents are not symbolic or ceremonial fillers. They're substantial, heavy, deliberately placed. For decades, Oak Island discoveries have been frustratingly scattered. Coins here, fragments there, objects displaced by flooding and collapse. This chamber presents the opposite scenario. Everything appears orderly, preserved, untouched. That alone hints at a different purpose. This wasn't a hiding place meant to be abandoned casually. It was a vault, and vaults aren't built to store trash. What adds another layer of tension is the chamber's condition. There's no evidence of intrusion, no signs of disturbance. Whatever lies inside has likely remained exactly where it was placed centuries ago. No looters, no partial recoveries, no accidental exposure. Insiders describe the mood among the crew when these interpretations surfaced as cautious disbelief, not excitement, not celebration. A realization that if these objects are real, the story of Oak Island shifts from chasing traces to confronting something intact and intentional. This also explains the sudden tightening of information, why footage may be limited, why production decisions appear to pivot abruptly. A sealed chamber containing structured objects isn't just another find, it's an endpoint. And once you reach an endpoint, every theory before it is either confirmed or completely destroyed. What truly separates this chamber from every other structure ever associated with Oak Island isn't its depth or its contents, it's the walls. According to leaked reports, subsurface imaging and core samples indicate the chamber is lined with a thin, continuous metallic layer, something never documented anywhere else on the island. This isn't scattered metal debris or contamination from modern drilling. The material appears uniform, deliberate, and bonded directly to the interior surface of the chamber. Insiders describe it as a protective shell, one that explains why the structure has remained intact while everything around it collapsed into chaos. The implications are staggering. A metal-lined chamber underground is not accidental engineering. It requires advanced material knowledge, controlled fabrication, and an understanding of long-term environmental stress. The lining appears to have acted as a barrier against groundwater pressure, chemical erosion, and even microbial decay. In simple terms, it turned the chamber into a sealed capsule. This also explains a long-standing mystery. For decades, drill cores pulled from surrounding areas showed strange metallic traces mixed into the soil, odd results that were usually dismissed as noise or contamination. Now, those anomalies may finally make sense. If the chamber's lining degraded slightly slightly over centuries, microscopic traces would naturally leach into the surrounding Earth, leaving behind the very signals researchers once ignored. What makes this even more unsettling is the precision. The metallic layer isn't patchy or reinforced in random sections. It appears continuous, as if the chamber was coated deliberately after construction, or possibly built around the lining itself. Either way, this wasn't a last-minute solution. It was part of the original design. That raises an uncomfortable question. Who had the resources, knowledge, and motivation to build something like this on a remote island? This wasn't a pirate hideout thrown together in secrecy. This was a controlled operation, planned to last centuries without maintenance. If the chamber truly exists in this condition, then Oak Island stops being a story about failed digs and unlucky searchers. It becomes a story about successful concealment, a structure designed not just to hide something, but to protect it indefinitely, no matter how many people dug in the wrong place. And once you accept that, the mystery stops being where the treasure is, and becomes why someone went to such extraordinary lengths to keep it sealed forever. As analysis of the chamber's metallic lining progressed, the discussion quietly shifted from engineering to history, and that's where the real shock landed. According to leaked lab summaries, early material readings suggest the lining is not a common metal at all, but a specific lead-silver alloy with a highly unusual isotopic signature. To the average viewer, that might sound unremarkable. To historians and metallurgists, it's a red alert. That particular alloy is historically associated with advanced Roman-era engineering. It was expensive, difficult to manufacture, and reserved for high-priority uses, reinforcing aqueducts, sealing sensitive archives, and lining elite burial chambers meant to endure indefinitely. This was not decorative metal. It was preservation technology. What makes this explosive is timing. The smelting techniques required to produce this alloy were lost after the fall of Rome and did not reappear in Europe for centuries. If the Oak Island chamber truly contains this material, then whoever built it possessed knowledge that mainstream history says should not have existed in the North Atlantic world at that time. Suddenly, older Oak Island anomalies take on new meaning. The Roman-style artifacts discovered in earlier seasons, once dismissed as planted curiosities or collector's items, no longer look random. They begin to resemble markers, fragments of a larger operation that was never meant to be obvious. This wasn't the work of isolated sailors or accidental visitors. Constructing a metal-lined chamber at that depth would have required organized labor, logistical support, and a long-term presence on the island. It suggests a group operating with wealth, authority, and access to forgotten technology. That realization destabilizes the accepted narrative entirely. If Roman-derived engineering knowledge reached Oak Island, directly or indirectly, then the island's history predates everything we've been told about transatlantic exploration. It implies contact, continuity, and intention long before Columbus ever sailed. And this is where insiders say tension began rising behind the scenes. Because once you acknowledge that possibility, Oak Island stops being a treasure hunt and becomes something far more dangerous to established history. It stops asking where the treasure is, and starts asking who was here first, and what were they trying to preserve. Once the idea of a preserved metal-lined chamber entered the conversation, a disturbing possibility emerged, one that reframes more than 200 years of failure on Oak Island. What if the money pit was never meant to be solved at all? What if it was designed to be found? According to sources familiar with the leaked findings, the newly identified chamber is not located at the traditional center of the money pit. Instead, it sits offset, positioned with deliberate distance, as if separated from the chaos on purpose. That detail alone has fueled a growing theory among researchers. The money pit may have been the greatest act of misdirection ever constructed. Think about its behavior. The pit collapses repeatedly. Flood tunnels trigger at predictable depths. Every attempt to stabilize it results in destruction. Over centuries, it has consumed lives, money, and effort, yet it never yields anything intact. That pattern doesn't look accidental anymore. It looks engineered to frustrate. By contrast, the chamber revealed by the leaks appears orderly, stable, and preserved. No collapse, no flooding, no chaos. Two underground systems behaving in completely opposite ways, located within the same island, suggest intentional design rather than coincidence. This aligns with a principle long associated with secretive historical groups: layered deception. The most obvious target draws attention, while the real objective remains untouched nearby. The deeper searchers dig into the wrong place, the more convinced they become that failure is inevitable. Exactly the outcome a skilled builder would want. Insiders suggest the chamber's placement may even correspond to known geometric alignments on the island, including secondary points tied to Nolan's cross. If true, this would mean Oak Island wasn't built around a single hole, but around a broader blueprint, one that only reveals itself when you stop chasing the trap. This theory also explains why generations of searchers felt close, but never quite succeeded. They weren't unlucky. They were manipulated by design. If the money pit was a sacrificial decoy, then everything about Oak Island changes. The flood tunnels, the collapses, the endless debris weren't failures of construction. They were features designed to exhaust, confuse, and mislead anyone who came looking for the wrong thing. And that leads to an unsettling conclusion. Whoever built Oak Island didn't just want to hide something. They wanted to control how it would be searched for and make absolutely sure no one reached the truth by accident. With the idea of deliberate misdirection now on the table, attention inevitably turns to the kind of organization capable of pulling it off. Not pirates, not lone explorers, but a group with experience in logistics, wealth management, coded systems, and long-term secrecy. This is where the Knights Templar re-enter the conversation, not as folklore, but as a functional explanation. The Templars were not just warriors, they were administrators, engineers, and bankers operating across continents. They understood how to move resources quietly, how to hide assets in plain sight, and how to protect sensitive materials through layered deception. When they hid something, they didn't rely on a single barrier. They used false targets, symbolic misdirection, and complex geometry. That strategy mirrors Oak Island almost too well. The money pit behaves like a trap designed to attract attention. Meanwhile, the newly leaked chamber sits offset, hidden, and geometrically positioned, exactly the kind of secondary location a Templar engineer would favor. Not the center of attention, but a point only visible to those who understand the full design. This theory also reframes Nolan's cross. For years, it's been debated as coincidence or natural formation. But if the island was laid out intentionally, the cross becomes a navigation tool, not a symbol, a way to mark key locations without drawing suspicion. The chamber's rumored placement along one of these secondary alignments strengthens the case that Oak Island was mapped, not guessed. Templar secrecy also explains the extreme construction choices: a metal-lined chamber, flooded decoys, a site meant to defeat curiosity through exhaustion. These are not the choices of people hiding gold for later retrieval. They are the choices of people protecting something that must never fall into the wrong hands. And that raises a new question. If this wasn't about wealth, what was important enough to justify centuries of secrecy? Some researchers believe the Templars weren't guarding money at all, but objects of ideological or historical power, documents, relics, or knowledge that could challenge religious or political authority. If Oak Island was part of a broader Templar escape plan following their persecution in Europe, then the island wasn't chosen randomly. It was remote, defensible, and hidden beyond the reach of enemies who didn't even know where to look. In that context, the chamber isn't a treasure vault. It's a safeguard, a final lock on something meant to outlast empires. And if that's true, then breaking into it doesn't just solve Oak Island. It reopens a chapter of history that was deliberately buried and kept that way for a reason. As the theory of a deliberate decoy gained traction, another unsettling idea began to surface among researchers and insiders. What if this chamber was never meant to hold gold at all? Its construction doesn't resemble a vault built for currency or trade goods. It resembles preservation, protection, reverence. The metal-lined walls, the depth, the isolation, and the precision all point toward one conclusion. Whatever was placed inside was meant to survive intact for centuries, untouched by water, pressure, or time. That level of effort doesn't make sense for wealth alone. Gold can be melted, replaced, stolen. You don't build a system like Oak Island to protect something replaceable. Some theories suggest the chamber may house relics, objects tied to belief systems, dynasties, or suppressed histories. Items whose power lies not in material value, but in what they represent. Ancient documents, sacred containers, proof of events or lineages that could destabilize accepted narratives if revealed. This is where Oak Island stops being a treasure hunt and becomes something far more serious. If the builders were protecting knowledge instead of wealth, then the Money Pit's endless destruction wasn't just misdirection, it was a filter, a way to ensure only those who understood the full design would ever get close. And now, according to leaks, Season 13 may be the moment that filter finally fails. The focus is no longer on searching randomly, it's on access. Reaching a chamber buried over 140 feet down in unstable, waterlogged ground is an engineering nightmare. Any mistake could collapse the shaft instantly. Flooding is guaranteed. Stabilization will require extreme measures, possibly ground freezing or massive containment system. This isn't television drama. It's high-risk excavation, which is why the tension behind the scenes is reportedly higher than ever. Once that chamber is breached, there's no walking it back. Whatever is inside will force answers, not just about Oak Island, but about who was capable of building this, when they were here, and why they went to such extraordinary lengths to stay hidden. For years, the mystery was whether Oak Island held anything at all. If these leaks are true, that question is gone. Something is there, something deliberate, something preserved. The only question left is whether humanity is ready for what was meant to stay sealed. And if this chamber is only the first lock in a much larger mechanism, then Oak Island's story may be nowhere near its end.